Now, if we really have stopped to have a think about how this is going to work, well, I want this panel to show me a list of users that are in the world. And I want it to present me with commands that I can apply to those users. So it is going to be an expanding list of users, and there could be up to 32 people in the world. So we may need to take that panel height up further, and you need to test this, obviously, if you can bring in sort of as many users as you can and just see that it doesn't sort of fall off the bottom and people start disappearing. But anyway, so really what we've got from there is that we need to keep track of people as they're coming and going. So to do this, we need to hook into the old code block events, which we won't be doing any code blocks for this, right? This is all in TypeScript, but the actual events are defined in code block. So what we'll do is we'll say, to hook up events like this, I'm actually going to add a new function. Again, this is a function that does exist in the class that is called before the start is called. Very, very useful for hooking up events. And what we're going to do here, just two simple events for you. Let's say this dot, and then there's a connect code block event. You can see there. Okay, so once we select that connect code block event, what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, the code block event is going to be running against this dot entity. Okay. And then the next bit's going to be, well, it's a predefined event. So if we say exent dot code block events is an enum and enumeration that contains a list of all the code block events. So by typing that in and pressing dot, look at this. So again, if you've been working in code blocks for a while and looking at the events there, you'll see some things that stand there. You got some new things. You know, there are some new items that you may not have seen, but this is a great list to see what events you can actually fire. But what we're after specifically is on player enter world. Yeah, that's good. Perfect. Okay, so that's saying we're firing against this entity. We are doing against the type of OnPlayerEnterWorld. And then we're going to, well, I'm going to bind this to a new function that doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to say this dot OnPlayerEnterWorld, okay? And we give that a lowercase because when I define the function, it's going to have a lowercase. It doesn't exist yet. Actually, yeah, we're just going to bind this on. Okay. And you can see it's complaining. This bit's fine. All this is actually fine, but it's just saying that this does not exist yet. Now, what I can say, I can either correct exit, or I can just go and declare that function. Now, I know that when I hover over this, look, it tells me what it wants me to actually have in a method that's bound to. So if I just run down to here and I say OnPlayerEnterWorld, and we'll say player is looking for basically anything, you have to call this player, for anything that has a type of player. That's the structure of it, guys. So now we just make that function, and you can see we now have a method called OnPlayerEnterWorld, which is bound to by this event, which is firing the pre-start. So we're actually wiring up this event to a method. Okay, just this one can be quite complicated. It'd take a little while for that to sink in. I don't know, let's get rid of the mini so you can actually see. I could multi-line this, but I don't want to for now. So if I highlight, I'm going to make sure you have a semicolon at the end as well. So if I highlight this, we also need to keep track of when players leave the well. That's very important. So we're going to add players to the list when they enter and remove them when they leaves. So if I highlight this, I'm going to change this because we spotted another event in here, which was exit world. Like so. And if I grab that, again, watch that this has a lowercase. So again, it's complaining that no such thing exists. And if I just go down here, we're going to make it exist. Yeah, player exit world. There you go. Wonderful. So we now have our solo events wired up there. So when a player comes into the world, we can do something with it. When a player leaves the world, we can do something else with it. So what I'm now going to do is we need to actually create a list of the players that are in the world. Now, I found that trying to use the player object is quite complex. It contains a lot of values and it contains a lot of properties that can lead TypeScript to create what's called a circular reference. I won't go into this right now, but if you're interested in circular references, feel free to Google that. But it just means the player object is a bit too complex for what I want to use it for from this point on. So normally you can use them, but for what we're going to do here today, we need to create something called an abstraction, which is where we create a really slimmed down version of that player object that only holds what we need. So in this case, it's going to be ID and name. But in the future, you might want to add extra properties, like, for example, the color of that name. And then you might want to use that color to define how it appears in the list. For example, you may want to make players who've been kicked a different color to the players who are in the world. All that kind of stuff. You can even add extra properties like is muted, is kicked. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do there. So to do that, we're actually going to, and usually I'd recommend doing these in an external class. Then you have to import them because this is only a simple class. So we're not going to need that. So if I create a new class and I call it player insult, okay, just define it like that. So much like this is a class down here, and that's our UI component. We're just creating a cheeky class in the same file. So now we've got that, we need to define the properties. Well, really, the only things I care about are going to be maybe an ID of the player, which we know it's going to be a number. Okay, so we'll define that as a number type. And then we're going to define a name, which is going to be a string. Wonderful. Okay, now you can see this is kicking up a wobbly, because these properties are saying that it's got no initializer, i.e. if someone were to create an instance of this class for every player, there's no guards to say it can't be null. Now, one thing you can do, but we're not going to do, is you can add a question mark, assign, num, 250, down to guess that. You can say any like that, and that would then diversify it. But we're not going to do that because I don't want it to be nullable. Like that could cause problems further down the line for anyone who's done the object-oriented programming. They will know what a null reference exception is. And TypeScript is very good at guarding you away from that. These are horrific runtime errors that if you don't safeguard your code as you're writing it, you could end up with things returning unexpected values. It's just annoying. So we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is we're going to put in a constructor. So with that constructor, that's going to say, we have to pass in two properties, and they can only be, well, actually, no, sorry, we're going to pass in one. We get passed in the player object, but we could get it to pass in the ID and the name, and we could create a secondary constructor for that. But seeing here through, we don't need to do that. We're going to have a player object. That's enough. That's enough. So we can then set this dot ID to player.id. Okay. Now that's going to work. Notice it likes that. This problem here has gone away. However, we need to do this for the string. So if I just copy that line, replace this here, and say this dot name and player.name, but there's a hidden problem here. If you do player.name, you can see actually there's a getter on this, whereas the ID is a simple number property. It can only ever return a number. The player name is actually, in itself, it's a readable horizon property, which means in itself it's not just a value at player.name. So you have to go one step further and put a .get on. And that should then resolve, and it's happy with that. So that's our player info class, guys. And you'll see us using that a bit further down the line because we'll be creating it as a simpler abstraction of player, but we don't store the player in it. We only store the ID and the name. And then we use the player object only to initialize those values when we create an instance of it. So with that out of the way, I'm going to move that up here. Okay. Let's fold that up so it doesn't confuse us. Okay. Let's go save that as I go to. So the next thing we need to do is remember we had OnPlayerEnterWorld and OnPlayerExitWorld. As I said previously, we need to update some kind of list. So what I'm going to do is under here. You don't have to write private, but I'm a bit of a fan of being quite explicit with these things. We'll call it players in world. Okay, and that's going to be a list of player info, that class we just created. Very simple. And we are going to initialize it with a bank array. So that's just an open close square bracket. So you can see it's player info, open close square bracket is the type. That's here is the actual initializer just here. So it means this will never be null. If we try and do a get count on this, it's never going to fall over because it's starting off as blank. Okay. Wonderful. So the next thing we're going to do, guys, is when player enters the world, we're going to have to actually put that into the array. So what we can do very simply when we start, we say this dot players in world dot and then push. Now, I'm going to show you how to do it wrong. So normally when we're doing these sorts of things, we can just pass in the player if we've defined it as a list of player. But because of what we're doing, we've created that abstractive of player info, which is our class. But our class needs this player object that's entered the world. So if I move that a sec, I'm going to say new player info. Open brackets. Putting the player in close brackets, and look at that. It's now creating a player info object using that constructor that we just wrote, which is going to assign the ID and the name to it. So I can actually, just for giggles, put in, actually I'm going to do it this way, ready? Const player hinto is equal to, because I'm going to use this in more than just one place. Okay. So you can see what I've done there. I've constructed the object on one line, and then I'm actually using that object instance to pass into here. And then what I can do is I can see console.log, and you don't need to do this, but I'm going to just show you for argument's sake how this works. Open, and then I'm going to say, and use this sort of these sort of weird, I don't know what they're called, but they're at the top left of your keyboard with the tilde key. And then I'm going to say dollar open choice curly brackets has entered the world. This is known as string interpolation, okay? This is the easiest way to inject strings into some kind of output. So I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say copied that as well. I would use this player of a name. So basically you can see that our player info is populated when a player comes into the world. So to replicate this, if I just go to the console at a sec, now I'm going to have to minimize this a sec. Now we're back in the editor. I'm going to pull this out. It's just a little bit now. It's a bit messy, guys, but get ready. I'm going to blink in and out of the world and see what happens. Boop. Check, and then jump back in. So that has not worked. There's sometimes that at the moment there are actually some issues with script syncing, okay? So watch out for that as you're working. We may have to sort of close and reopen a few times for that to work. But let me, oh no, I'm sorry, my bad. I have to make sure the world sim on button is on now. Again, I don't have this on the screen, I'm afraid, but it's at the top. It's at the top right of the screen. Yeah. So click the world sim button. Let's say on. So we go back, you can actually see the outputs there. You can see the ID. And it says 3-eyed tiger has entered the world. It also says 3-eyed builder has entered the world, because believe it or not, you're in here as well. So if I were to tier that panel, okay, if I now come out of the world and back in, you can now see that I've managed to rejoin the world. It's actually, if I do that one more time, that you can see down here in the console, it's triggered the same message twice. So just down the bottom, it has a little number 2 just below the user message there. And if I was to do it one more time, you see that's now 3. So I've entered the world now 3 times in total, since it's been running at least. So okay, I'm going to turn the world sim off, and then we're going to just pull the screen down a sec. Check. Wonderful. So then move myself over to here. And then we're going to reopen the code editor. So if I go into here and enter here, that's all. Okay. So I'm going to now copy all this stuff here. I'll paste this in here. Now, I'm not necessarily showing you the best programming practices here today, but I'm showing you some pretty good ones. That will give you a good start. Like I said, I'm coding for hopefully clarity. So initially, wait a sec. Sure. Yeah. So it's always encouraged when you're coding these things to try and reuse as much as you can. So because these 2 code blocks are very similar, you could pull them out into a separate method, but I'm not going to show you that today. I want to keep this clear for people who are new to TypeScript and learning all this stuff. So I'm going to change this because this is now the OnPlayerExitWorld chain. I changed this to has exited the world. Okay. And really, apart from that, it's exactly the same thing, right? Sorry, no, it's not at all. When a player enters, we've got to push them into an array, okay? But when a player leaves, we're not pushing them into the array, are we? So what we need to do is to actually remove them from the array. So what we're really going to have to do here, I'll move this line here. Let's just space this up a bit. We're going to say, this dot players in world is going to have to be equal to, we'll do an array operation on this. So this dot players in world, and we're going to filter out, okay? So filter is going to allow us to remove something. So what I'm going to do now is open the brackets there. It's filtered as a method. And then I'm going to go on to a new line. We're going to say item. This, I believe, is what's known as a lambda. Lambdas can also be called anonymous functions. I believe it's where you've got a function that is being run in this filter that we're building. This stuff is quite a complicated subject, so if you're not understanding it, don't worry, but this is a really great way, this is a really, really great way to sort of legibly get rid of something from an array. So, player dot name dot is it? Do I need to get on that actually? Yes, I'm sorry. So I'm doing the comparison, right? So what's happening here is this is basically like an argument in where we're saying for each item in Players and World, we're going to quickly whip through it. And for each item, if the name of the item, which is our player info object, if I get that, I can actually just put up a little reminder there in a pop-up box. It says that in the bottom parameter item player info. Okay. So if the name of that player info is equal to the player who left the world, we do have to call get on that. It's so it's not equal to, but we're filtering out anything where it's not equal to. So that means that when we create this new filtered list, it will not have the name of that player in it. So it will not have that player info in there. Hey, if you understand this at this stage, you're doing bloody well, because that is quite advanced stuff. That's if you've never written a line of programming, so they don't get you to understand that. But if you've been working in programming, then yeah, you should be familiar with that. So that's that basically, guys. Now, one thing I would like to do before we move on is I'd like to robustify this. So the filter method's okay because that's going through saying, just pull me back a list which doesn't contain the player who left. Well, it's the player isn't in that list. It's not going to go wrong. It's just going to return the same way. So that's okay on its own. But the push, on the other hand, could, under certain conditions, it could throw a bit of a wobbly. We could end up having the player who already is in that list being added twice, and that would be odd. So we're going to do it via the player, okay? And we'll put in this condition. We'll say if, and just open those brackets. I'm just going to sort of work this down here so you can kind of see it. So our condition's going to go in here, and we're going to say if, well, let's see this dot amazing world dot includes. Now, we're going to take this thing here, okay, and say if this players in world already includes this player info object, you can see that this is the wrong way round. So logically, it's saying here, it is already in less than push him in there. We don't want that, so we need to apply a negative to that. So we're going to put out exclamation mark in there, which actually reverses the order of this expression. It says, if player in world does not include player info, then push him in. So it means if someone comes in with the same exact player, don't add them to the list, just in case you get any crossover there. It doesn't happen, really. I may have seen it happen once or twice, but generally it's not a thing to be too concerned of, but it will robustify it and help safeguard you against that. Now, having two of the same player in a world in itself is a bit of a problem, but, you know, we'll all go there right now. Okay, so next thing, what are we going to do? We've got our thing which adds players to the list. So I'm just going to work out what we're going to do next, guys. I think